Welcome everyone to this evening's event. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Abdullah Almandeel from our Vice President of University Development, who will introduce our speaker. But before he gets up, I'd like to say just a little bit. In our WEP program, Dr. Almandeel is primarily responsible for helping us get in-kingdom speakers. And I just want to thank him for doing a marvelous job. We had a wonderful speaker this afternoon that had people standing in the aisles. And I learned quite a bit there. And I'm sure tonight's speaker will be just as exciting, but I'll leave Dr. Almandeel to talk about that. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and honored guests. Thank you for joining us here tonight. Our guest tonight is one of Saudi Arabia's most resilient and experienced economists and businessmen. Mr. Suliman Muhammad Almandeel is the managing director and a board member of the Saudi Industrial Investment Group, a company at the forefront of improving and developing the industrial base in the kingdom. Saudi Industrial Investment Group is a joint stock company based in Jubail that has a partnership with the U.S. Chevron Phillips Chemical Company with a total investment of $8 billion. Mr. Almandeel also serves as the vice chairman of the National Petrochemical Company. Mr. Almandeel has an impressive 36 years experiences in the government and private sectors. He served on the board of directors of the Riyadh Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority, SIIG. He held high positions in Riyadh Bank and the Saudi Industrial Development Fund. And he was Deputy Minister in the Ministry of Finance and National Economy and Secretary General for the Public Investment Fund from 1980 to 1992. Aside from his business successes, Mr. Almandeel has demonstrated commitment to developing and mentoring young businessmen in the kingdom. Mr. Almandeel is a writer in the Al-Watan newspaper, where he writes weekly economics articles. It is an honor to have Mr. Almandeel here today to share with us his insights into bridging cultural differences in business. We are delighted to have Mr. Almandeel as a part of the KAUST family. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Suliman Almandeel.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to be with you tonight, and I thank you all for coming. And I definitely want to thank Dr. Abdullah Almandeel for inviting me to join this distinguished group. Every time I have to give a speech, I remember a story that I would like to share with you. During the Roman times, their entertainment centered on going to the Colosseum and bringing in gladiators, or basically slaves, and having them wrestle with hungry lions for the sake of the enjoyment of the audiences and the emperor. So there was such a session, and the gladiator was there, and the hungry lion came in, but the gladiator came to the lion and said something in his ear. The lion went to a corner and sat down. The audience and the emperor were not happy, so they brought the slave to the emperor, and he asked him, "What happened? What did you say to him?" I told him, "After you have your dinner, you will have to give a speech." I had a choice of a number of topics to talk to you about. Could have been finance, economics, industry in general, or petrochemicals. But given the international nature of KAUST, I thought it would be best to share with you some of the experiences we've been through in creating joint ventures, and I do admit it's mostly with the Americans, because for a reasonable reason, a logical reason, Americans were the first to set up the large Aramco company in Saudi, and today, with the petrochemical industry coming next to the petroleum, they also happen to have the largest investments in Saudi Arabia. My lecture will be composed of two things. I would like to take you on a historical tour only to highlight some of the stops I have been through, which always highlight as well the relationship between a Saudi culture and American culture. And then I'll go through the type of differences that we faced in actual business and what we did about bridging those differences. I was one of the lucky Saudis back when I finished high school to get a scholarship and go to the US back in 1968. And if you know something about US history, 1968 was a very critical year in the history of the US. It really ranks as high as some other years in the history of the US, namely 1941 because of the Pearl Harbor attack, which introduced the US to the Second War, or 1865, which is actually the end of the Civil War and the true unification of the US, or 1776, the beginning of the War of Independence. After 68, the next year that would stand out will have to be 2011 because of the September attacks. What happened in 1968? It was the culmination of the anti-Vietnam War movement. And the US after 68 is not the same like it was before 68. Of course, out of the anti-Vietnam movement came the hippie movement. And it depends how you look at it. It could mean, the drug culture or the free love movement or whatever one you call it, anti-capitalism. It was all built into that movement. Also, in 1968 was the assassination of both Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. And the Civil Rights Acts were actually completed in 68, so it is a critical year. After that date, basically the civil rights movements became a reality and was there to stay. After coming back from the US, I was lucky enough also to have found something, the easiest way to describe it, similar to your institution, KAUST. Saudi government at that time decided that they want to create a government bank to support industry, but they actually entrusted the setting up of the bank to Chase Manhattan Bank. And what I consider very valuable in that case is that Chase Manhattan, being a commercial bank, didn't frankly care about higher degrees. They did care a lot about practical trainings. And my advice to my sons and to anybody that might ask me today, I would say, if you had the option of getting a practical training or going for a higher degree, put the higher degree aside and go for the practical training. The higher degree, as a matter of fact, it'll be a lot easier. We'll have more experience once you go through the practical training. That was the SIDF experience, I call it, Saudi Industrial Development Fund. There was also the Public Investment Fund, which I was entrusted to manage when it was about to fund the petrochemical industry. At the time, nobody believed that such an industry can exist here. But actually the Saudi government did a lot of things a lot of incentives to attract those industries. And today they are here both in Jubail and Yanbu, and even Rabat is coming up as another industrial center. After that, I left the government and we finished negotiating with Chevron at the time, and we set up a $650 million investments in Jubail. Chevron eventually became Chevron Phillips as far as their chemical division, and they are the ones who have grown with us. And we have, as Dr. Abdullah mentioned, about $8 billion of investments. Now, this happened over 17 years almost. And a lot of things happened during those times. It wasn't easy times all the way. We started small venture and then we grew. And here I'll share with you some of the differences between the two cultures, and then later on I'll talk about how did we try our best to kind of smoothen things and make sure we have a good working relationship, which I must say we do by today. Over the past 17 years, I did notice quite a change in corporate America. Corporate America at those old days would leave the business development managers work out the details of their agreements, and only later will hand the outline of the agreements to the lawyers, and the lawyers will draft the documents. Well, there has been many bad cases in the US, namely Enrons, Tycos, and others that corporate America changed. They would have to position the lawyers in the negotiating from day one. And that's something, to be honest, we in Saudi Arabia were not used to. We like to shake hands and say we have a deal. But corporate America got really scared, and you cannot get an executive to sign anything or even to tell you he agrees before he gets a green light from the lawyers. Well, to accommodate this, all we had to do is just get similar quality lawyers. They're expensive, but we had no other choice. There was no sense of us having them with the best capabilities in law, and we're sitting here, you know, reminiscing about the old days when the lawyers were less involved in the work. Another difference, maybe I would call it a good lesson rather than a difference, but it was a difference. The concept of win-win situation. Over the years, I must give credit to the Americans. They'll set a target for when they want a negotiation, at what level they will agree to certain arrangements. And as soon as you get to that level, they're ready to sign. Well, for my people, it seems to me that historically, the Arabian Peninsula was actually the crossroads between civilizations, you know, between Africa, the Roman, the Byzantine Empire, the Persian empires. So the people of the Arabs of the peninsula were actually the traders, the carriers of the caravans, the leaders of the caravans. And those guys, they have to get their cut. They have to bargain to get their share or their commission or whatever you call it. So bargaining and haggling is in our culture. And it took me a while to adjust to a fact that, okay, they've set their goal. Now that you're ready, now that you've agreed to this level, we are ready to sign. You want to go, as a Saudi, you want to come back and say, well, no, let's improve it a little bit in our favor. You know, let's make it a win and a half against a win minus one. But I must say, I've liked the concept, and I've been promoting it to my colleagues, because I tell you, I can never go with my wife to the market. She will bargain to the point where I'll just say, I'll go away to a cafe. I just cannot be associated with this bargaining that you're doing. Safety concept. Generally speaking, obviously in America or anywhere else in the world, there has been accidents after which people got more conscious about the safety of employees and their plants. It's doubly so in the petrochemical industry. So a lot of effort goes into training the employees. Saudis by nature, and that's possibly comes out of their religion, they really don't believe in taking precautions. They just shrug their shoulders and say, if God wills it, it will happen. You know, why go through this? Like you're challenging the will of God. Well, it took us a lot of effort, we and our partners, to really take them through the process. Just to give you another example, very few Saudis would buy an insurance policy. Probably will buy a car insurance policy because it lessens the haggle and the difficulties if there is an accident, but very few have property insurance or life insurance. And that's part of the culture, you know. You just kind of rely on God's will, and if it was up to you, you say, I'll wait and see what happened. Well, in the petrochemical industry, definitely, you cannot afford this attitude. You have to be, it has to be overemphasized every day, every morning. And actually, one of the best ways I've found out that is applied in this business is you tie a good deal of the bonus to the safety, not to the profitability of the venture. You do care about profitability, but you give it a lesser weight than safety. This way you raise the awareness and the knowledge and the concern at every employee's level when he knows his pocket would be hit or he will lose on a bonus just because somebody was relaxed on the safety. And that's why I said bonuses are tied to achieving goals, meaning mainly safety ahead of profits. We usually stay in our positions a lot longer than what the corporate America faces. Actually, corporate America became just like a revolving door. They'll give you 2 years, and if you don't deliver by then, you're out of the door. Somebody else is coming as a chairman or as a CEO. It's very tiring for us because we like to build on long-term relationships, but that's corporate America. They don't have the patience to give. It's in the old days that you'd have Michael Eisner say 25 years at Disney. You have all the Hewlett-Packard staying in their positions until they retired. That's not happening today. And I've been through 5 CEOs of my partners when I'm still here, and I think they're looking forward to see me go, but I'm here. Another learning lesson or a difference is really the role of the HR departments in any venture, because we have employees relationship and you have HRs, and I guess a good deal of you know the difference between the two. HR really cares about the employee, his development, his future career plan, etc. Employee's relationship just concentrates on his vacations, what's due to him, his evaluations, and historically we tend to have more of the employee's relationship and less of the human resource concerns and sympathy. I think we are learning to be more towards the friendlier example, which is the human resource. Communication or conferencing, that's really coming big, giving a number of reasons. 1, the technology allows this video and audio conferencing. 2, traveling is becoming quite a headache and expensive. Thirdly, and more importantly, in joint ventures, you really make board meetings less dramatic by communicating all the time between board meetings, and you allow each side to kind of solve their problems or go back and find solutions, and you kind of agree on a number of things, whereby you take it to the boards just for their approval of stamp approval. It lessened as I said, the dramatization of the board meetings, but it really made life easier to work out issues and not to have any big issues awaiting the board, except in very few cases. What have we learned from this, and how did we bridge differences? We learned a lot actually as Saudis, and we benefited. I felt that we are benefiting more out of this. We can be beneficial to the other side by educating them about local conditions. They come in here just like you came to Thual, to Kaust, wondering what are you going to see, well, I don't know how much introductions you were made, but definitely there are images of Saudi that probably you will hopefully nicely surprised once you have settled in here. But it's a very critical thing to do before you go into a joint venture, and even if you are in one and you want to see it grow. Do study and find out as much as you know about the other partner. You should know what makes him tick, or what makes him comfortable and what makes him nervous. I'm saying this mostly about Americans, but the same thing applies to all other cultures. But they are different, obviously, as you know, the Japanese from the British, from the Germans, from the French. But as I said in the beginning, because I've done most of my work with Americans, I find it very easy. I'll give you a small example. When I'm wearing my thobe and negotiating in Riyadh, and new guys come in for negotiations, I say, who's going to win the Super Bowl? Is it going to be the New York Giants or the New England Patriots? And that kind of takes them aback, you know. What is this Saudi sitting in the desert asking about football? Okay? But what this does is to kind of break the ice. Okay, he's one of us. He knows our football game. The American football game, for those of you who know, is only played in America. Canada plays it, but differently. So for a Saudi to be interested in that game, it tends to take away a lot of the whatever you call it is. It's just, as I said, it makes you feel, it makes them feel like you are, you know, somebody on their side, or at least you enjoy some of what they enjoy. To understand the other side, you'll have to do your homework. And I do stress the word read about other cultures. And I hear, because I keep telling my sons to read, and they tell me, we do read every day. I say, no, you're chatting, you're not reading. You just convince yourself that chatting is reading. And I cannot stress this enough, because I found it very helpful over the years. And I tell you something more. Reading about failures is even more educational than reading about success stories. There are so many intricacies in the failures, more lessons than the successes. So I gave here 2 examples which I recommend people to read about. It's the Enron case and the Lehman Brothers. You may want to add to it the Bernie Madoff situation, but in each one of these, you see how corporate America failed and how people tried to take advantage of the system. And that's important, because you don't want to go through this thing. You don't want to go through the fraud piece of it, nor do you want to be defrauded by somebody. So these stories tend to open up your eyes to the future. On the other hand, I just finished a 570-page book about the life of Steve Jobs. And boy, I recommend that book. It's possibly the most beautiful book I read in my life. By the author. The author did a good job, and this genius's life is inspiring and worth reading about. So I don't want to leave you with a gloomy reading about the negatives only, but Steve Jobs, it's available in audio, it's available on the net, but again, I truly believe that I've done a good job in my life as far as creating joint ventures, because I tried hard to know the other side, and I negotiated to the point where it was a win-win situation. Thank you very much. Yeah,
So we have time for questions. Do we have the microphones in there? Oh, here we go.
Maybe turn the lights up. So.
Can we turn the lights up a bit on the...
I would like to ask our perceptive and very distinguished speaker to return the favor with respect to a good icebreaker question. I happen to be a New England Patriots fan, but if I walk into a room of Saudi businessmen or Saudi professors or Saudi government agents, what can I ask that shows, and of course not before studying it so as not to be stranded, but what would be a similarly broad and ice-breaking question?
Well, it could be if you teach yourself few Arabic words, not the dirty ones, the good ones. And, you know, if you know more about the culture, if you study a little bit about the Bedouin life in the old days, and there are quite a few books on that, or Philpi wrote many books in Saudi, and you just come up to that Saudi and say, oh, is that life still there? I read about your life like this. And, I tell you, for instance, Saudis, I mean, being in the desert, you have to be generous to your guests because they have no alternative. They could die if you don't. And some Saudis, in the old tradition, they don't want you to be, they want you to take your time eating as much as you want. So what they do, they'll bring you a lamb with rice. They'll put you on the tent, and they close the tent, and they'll go away. Just that you don't eat a little bit and get up. They want you to feel comfortable. That's part of the desert culture. You know, it's not to mean anything else but be comfortable. You know, if somebody comes to a Bedouin in the desert, by the Bedouin law, you should host him 3 days. And it's not acceptable that you ask him, who are you, or why are you here? It's only after 3 days that you do that. That's part of the desert culture, or Bedouin culture. I mean, there are many things like this. I know you have a job to do here, you don't have it all the time, but I think, frankly, when you go back, you say, I wish I kind of mixed, you know, the nice life at Kaust with a little bit of more knowledge about the local conditions, because that's what you take away with you back home. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is the following, more or less. Could you explain how the Saudi society changed over more or less over the last 40 or 50 years? In particular, in terms of how one does business, in terms of also in general terms. That means have people become more open, or have tradition more or less been replaced, or also general things. That means how people interact with each other. Thank you.
Well, I would say for the most part, some people might get nostalgic and long for the old days, but to be honest, no. Country was poor, medical health was non-existent, education was weak. The only thing nostalgic about the family living in one house, you know, the grandfather, the grandmother, the uncles, the fathers, the mothers, all the cousins. I mean, but that's even those living conditions were not right. It was just overcrowded. But some people long for those, but to be honest, I cannot compare our lives today to what they were. It's a lot better today. In terms of business, obviously we just have to go with the flow. We have to, you cannot just shake hands with your brother or cousin and say, we'll form this company. You still have to go through legal work and set it up right. Because in the old days, the two brothers would set up something and they find it unacceptable to sign any papers. But once they're gone, you have a lot of court cases between the cousins because the elders failed to regularize their relationship, their business relationships.
Mr. Suliman, thank you very much for your talk. Really interesting. I was particularly amused by your comments about lawyers. Having worked in North America and in Europe, I concur. You'll be very pleased to hear here at KAUST, we're now starting to use lawyers instead of laboratory rats in our biology experiments. There are three reasons for this. The first is lawyers are more plentiful than laboratory rats. The second reason is that we find our researchers don't form emotional attachments to the lawyers. And the third reason is there are some things laboratory rats won't do for money.
I have many of those, but I'll give you one that I can say it here. It says somebody needed a heart transplant, and they gave him the choice. There's a 20-year-old student who died, and there is a 50-year-old lawyer heart. Which one do you want? He said, the lawyers. They said, why? He said, because it's never been used. Anything? Oh, go ahead.
Thank you very much for your speech. I have two questions. The first one, in your opinion, what are the best businesses in Saudi Arabia? Best three businesses in Saudi Arabia. The second question, I worked for 3 years in one of petrochemical industries, and I think they are production companies. I mean, what's the next step? I think we are succeeded in as petrochemical, companies, but what's the next step? I mean, after having the basic and intermediate chemicals, what's the next steps in Saudi Arabia? Thank you.
Well, the stock market is a good indicator of the profitability or how well some sectors are doing. Obviously, industry is doing well and banking is doing well in Saudi Arabia. These two sectors then, because keep in mind, you have mixed results in contracting and you have a very unfavorable environment in what used to be the agriculture. The service sector generally is fragmented in Saudi, still not representing itself as a major one like the banking and the industry. And the industries, two main pillars are the petrochemicals and the cement industry, or the building materials in general. The ladies, nobody from the ladies? Maybe I want to ask my Saudis, maybe they disagree with me, maybe they are nostalgic to the old days. It's up to you, you can disagree, but we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Hello, Suliman. My name is Osman. I knew you from 30 years ago. The diversification of the economic base has been a policy for a long time. How successful has it been, and how would you evaluate it at present?
Now, you could have asked me, where do you see the challenges ahead of Saudi? Because it goes beyond the diversification away from oil and petrochemicals, and that's quite a challenge. We have, to be honest, we've allowed others in the region to take charge, to take the lead at our expense. We ought to be the hub of all the region here, Saudi Arabia, given our financial strengths and given our size and our population, etc. We let that slip through our hands. Some of it, a good deal of it, went to Dubai, some to Bahrain, some to Qatar, some to Abu Dhabi. That ought to be brought back, and we can do it, but it's going to take a monumental effort on legislation, on changing a lot of habits and changing a lot of minds around here. That's one. The second one, which should be close to your hearts, is employment and the quality of education. You see, I know I was impressed today with what I saw today, but I kept telling Dr. Abdullah, I only wish this is happening all across Saudi Arabia. Can you do it? Can you lead the way? Inshallah, I hope so. But that is one of my concerns, is the quality of education, which reflects automatically on the unemployment of those young people who come to the labor market. In the back.
Yes, thank you very much for the talk tonight. My question is, would you like to write a memo for your experience for the youngster to learn more about the bridging culture in business, or a book? Thank you.
Well, I try my best to kind of bring some of these experiences to either through lectures or through articles, but no, I wouldn't think it's enough to constitute a book at this conjuncture. And if I do that, it means I'm retiring, and I'm not retiring yet. I'm enjoying the experiences that I keep learning. And to be honest, once you are in a joint venture, you're amazed of how much you learn every day. It's especially, to be honest, with corporate America, because they keep changing, they keep evolving, they keep, if they do something wrong, they change it. They accept change. If you go back to the Disney story and look at Michael Eisner, for 25 years he was the total dictator at that company, and nobody could disagree with him. And then all of a sudden they kicked him out when they felt he wasn't doing a good job. Same thing happened with Steve Jobs. First time around, they kicked him out. But he was somebody that you cannot kick out because of his great ideas and his ability to market the products. That story I think you should read in any form, not necessarily 500 plus pages, but it is very inspiring. In the back, the lady in here.
Salam, you mentioned gaps that you find because of differences in the quality of education, but how would you suggest going about bridging those gaps and approaching people in a way that is least, I guess, insulting is the right word that I'm coming to?
Well, I'm afraid it's going to be a long process, and you're going to have to start from the early stages of teaching students. The damage is not happening once you get to university. It has already happened. You know, our sons or daughters come up, you ask him in high school, what do you want to do? He shrugs his shoulders, says, I don't know. It depends what type of major I find at university. I'll try my luck at that. So the culture of education and doing what you would like to do, has been absent from our lives. And I must say, I went and studied economics. I don't know why. I wasn't necessarily interested in economics per se, but it just happened. And as I mentioned in my presentation, I give credit to the practical training program. I had an option to go for higher education, and I'm glad I didn't. I'm glad I went to the practical trainings, because I could have gone after that, and it would have been real easy to get higher education, but I just got involved in that, and I found it very useful, and that's why I meant to mention it for the young people. Do take advantage of practical trainings whenever you're offered the opportunity.
Thank you.
It appears that a fascinating experiment in bridging cultural differences in business is about to take place on our northern border in the King Abdullah Economic City and in several of the other economic cities that are being created, especially with the idea of luring expatriate multinationals to rally the economy and diversify it. We've been intrigued with the notion that we could be a Stanford-like think tank to a Silicon Valley set of incubating new companies, not only within our industrial park, but in the economic city. How do Saudi business people and Saudis in general feel about the economic cities as a concept and at the rate of progress at which their goals are being achieved? I know you can only speak for yourself, but I think you're extremely well connected. I'd be interested in hearing an assessment, a few years into the project of what has been achieved and where might it go?
Well, I would broaden your question to ask, what does the business community know about KAUST? And I know Dr. Abdullah is doing a good job introducing KAUST to the community, and I think he and his team needs to intensify that efforts, because I think there is a lot of opportunities between KAUST and the business community. They have their plan, they have their schedules, but I truly, until I came today, I didn't know much. I read about KAUST, but you have to see it, you have to be engaged with the people like yourselves to appreciate what's going on. The research part was totally new to me. I just thought it is just another educating university. Now, as far as economic cities, obviously I have my concerns about it because it was done hastily. Their goals wasn't well defined. Unfortunately, many of them are turning out to be real estate speculation developments. I hope it's not too late to make sense out of them and to benefit from them. But to be honest, the vision wasn't there. There was a lot of talk about attracting, employing 1 million here, 500,000 there, attracting international companies, etc. But no real effort was done beyond the development of the real estate itself and the ports and the likes. So people find it easy to talk about developing real estate, because that's the easier part of it. It's the attraction of international firms and what you have to do internally, etc. That a lot of our Saudi people fail. I'm talking about the decision makers. When they go for an idea, okay, King Abdullah, I call this King Abdullah Dream House, and he made it happen. But that's not a real estate development, that's a mines development. The real estate came along as a necessity to bring in the minds of those young people and the staff, etc. That I can see, it's a complete plan, but economic cities, I'm afraid there will be a lot of revision of what to do with them and how best to salvage them. Because a lot of money has been sunk in some of them.
I have another question that refers more or less to that kind of long-term vision in particular that is, in my opinion, not prevalent anymore in, say, for example, corporate America, as well as not in Europe in particular. You have a lot of CEOs, as you, for example, mentioned, that stay in a company, for example, for 3 years, 4 years, and then go, more or less. It means the only motivation is more or less the money that they get, and not about, how should I say, the sustainability of the company and also the long-term vision. What is the situation currently like in Saudi Arabia? That means, is that attitude changing more or less, this kind of short-term thinking and not long-term thinking, or is it still something like that is still prevalent and it's still something like that is preserved more or less in the Saudi business environment, also in the Middle East more or less?
I must say there is something with the sound. I'm not getting the gist of your question. If you
my question is exactly the following. This kind of short-term thinking that is, in my opinion, prevalent in, say, corporate America, corporate Europe, corporate also Asia, is that also something that is, so to say, coming into the Arabian world, or is it still something like that many people seem to fight against? It means, are employees, for example, in Saudi Arabia more attached to their company? That means, are they more or less employees of their life? Or is it still something like, yes, I'm jumping from one job to another?
Well, what I can tell you is, on the business side, on the private sector side, consider Saudi Arabia is moving into the same corporate structures, the same corporate cultures like everybody else. The problem comes when the private sector still, because of the government ownership of the most of the oil income, and they have to do the infrastructure, they have to do the laws, etc. It's when you have to join up the government and the private sector. The government historically used to employ a lot of people when the population was smaller. Now they cannot. They are overstaffed. So they want the private sector to employ. But the private sector has its issue with the government. Okay, but you're stifling the business, you know. Why is Dubai growing? You know, it's because of the rules and regulations you have here. You know, people go to Dubai, actually relocate from Saudi to Dubai, and 70 to 80% of their activities and what they do is back in Saudi. Because of the GCC laws, they don't have to, they can move easily, and there are no taxes between the countries. So if you're talking about the private sector, I think in due course you will find it, if you deal with it, it's like dealing with any other country. I would say better than what you might get in Russia or in some other of these emerging countries. But we do have this issue when it comes to the legislation, to what you need government to do, then we get bogged down a good deal of the time.
Thank you.
Abdulhamid Al-Anizi, thank you for your presentation. My question is, how do you see that the goal of 10-10 not achieved at that time in competitiveness?
Well, I don't know about these goals being set up so arbitrarily. Okay, it was a good try to use that 10-10 slogan to push for faster development for attracting businesses. But to attract business, you really need a number of factors. It's not just the flow of direct investments. It's not how much money you have in the bank. It's really, there are many things you have to take care of in order to say, well, now I have the environment that will attract business away from Singapore or some of these other countries in here. So I think we really need to do some more soul searching to get to the next level. And I think we can do it. It's going to take time. And to be honest, that's because I worked in the government and I'm working in the private sector. It's easy to make decisions in the private sector. The problem is with the government sector, because it's just too bureaucratic, a long process. But in the private sector, whenever we don't have to deal with the government, boy, we can make a decision easily. And to be honest, we are lucky in the petrochemical industry because we basically deal mainly with Aramco and the Royal Commission. And those are heaven compared to the rest of the government bureaucracy. So that helped. If you ask me why petrochemical, it's not the price of gas alone. It's not the infrastructure, which is good, done by Jubail and Yambo. It's really not having the same typical problems that you see it happening with the other activities vis-a-vis petrochemicals.
Hello. I was wondering if you had a recommendation on one book to read, if you could recommend one book that's about Saudi Arabia or the Arab Peninsula specifically. Thank you.
Depends. You want a historical or something recent?
Anything that you think would be useful to know.
Oh.
Or both.
I think if you want to go back to history, because oil is so important to Saudi, there is that book called The Prize. It will tell you about the history of oil and how we got here. But one of the most recent books is a book by Robert Lacey, In Kingdom. Probably, although I must say it discusses mostly 20 years ago. So it's not, the history that it talks about is not a recent one. The very recent ones, I must say, I haven't come across one that, I do see some books, but I know most of what's in the book, so it doesn't attract me. It doesn't have a view or something new that teaches me. But just keep trying. Go to Jarir and see. You will find some interesting ones.
Let's thank our speaker.
I think
Do we have another?
because she's a Saudi, she has to be given a chance.
Definitely. One more question, right? Oh, yes.
Sorry about that. I do have one more question. Over the past few decades, things have changed dramatically, not only in Saudi Arabia, but globally. And your talk touched on that a little bit, but also in addition to lawyers, the invention and use of internet, for example, has grown exponentially, I think. And I was just curious about your opinion on where you think Saudi Arabia will be 50 years from now. What do you think Saudi Arabia will be like?
50 years from now.
Well, I didn't tell you I'm a fortune teller yet. I don't know. I think we have the opportunity. You know, we're not some of those very poor countries that are so mired in problems that you cannot see how they're going to get out of it. We have a lot of smart people. We have luckily good resources. We've managed to come, if I tell you about our poor life 50 years ago, you know, we are the ones who were immune enough to make it. Each family, each Saudi family will bring in, my mother had 12, and you had to have 10, 12, so that maybe 2 will survive because of the disease and the hygienic conditions, etc. So we've come a long way. Now you ask me the difficult question, you know, it's really, as you can see, the world is changing, technology is changing a lot of things. I know my sons don't think the way I think, and I stopped lecturing them about how we lived because they will just get up. You say, you're living in your times, you don't appreciate our times, so there is no sense of, you keep preaching us day and night. And I stopped actually, you know, because they're in their 20s and they know, I mean, they'll find their path in life. So to ask me about 50 years from now, I cannot tell you. Even 5 years from now, I think this region will be changing. Hopefully to the better, but God knows.
Thank you very much. We have a small token to give you of our appreciation.
This is a small token from web team. Remember Coast when you go back, and we hope to come back again to Coast.
Thank you.